Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Razak School of Government's 8th webinar in 2021, our 21st installment in total. Today's webinar is called, What is Your Brand? Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items and the structure of our webinar session today. To those who follow this webinar through Zoom, please mute your microphones. We are also broadcasting this webinar live on our Facebook. This webinar session is divided into 3 segments. First, we will begin with key questions posed to our guest speaker. Then, we will answer questions from participants. At any time during the webinar, you may submit your questions to the guest speaker. Just type your questions in the chat and comment section. Please keep your questions short and straightforward. As time allows, we will address as many questions as possible. Lastly, we will then wrap up today's webinar session. This webinar is recorded, and you will be able to access this recording via our Facebook and YouTube page. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today. Dr. Paul Temporal is a leading global expert on brand creation, development, and management, with over 30 years of experience in consulting and training. He has worked with leading companies and governments and is well known for his practical and results-oriented approach. He was educated at Leeds and Oxford universities in the UK and holds bachelor, master, and doctoral degrees in management, a degree in economics, and a postgraduate certificate in education. Paul is an associate fellow at the Saïd Business School and at Green Templeton College in the University of Oxford. He's also a visiting professor at Peking University, HSBC Business School, Shenzhen, China. He has featured in mainstream global media, such as the New York Times, Sunday Times of India, China Daily, The Economist, and multiple e-media. He has written 17 best-selling books on brand strategy and management. The public sector organization he has consulted include the ASEAN Development Bank, APEC, ASEAN, OIC, and the government of Brunei, Canada, Dubai, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, and the UAE. He has worked with Innovation UK, the UK Civil Service, the UK Prime Minister's Office, the World Bank, and the European Union, in addition to many ministries, departments, statutory bodies, and government-linked companies in ASEAN countries. On the corporate sides, clients include Bank of China, BMW, Coca-Cola Corporation, Microsoft, Unilever, Intel, Marks & Spencer, Maybank, Petronas, SIMW Group, HSBC, Faber Group, Singapore Technologies, Marie Claire, Panasonic, Volvo, and many more. Since 2011, Dr. Temporal has collaborated with RSOG to develop and deliver its longest-running senior leadership program, focused on transformational leadership and change. He was also instrumental in developing and delivering Razak School of Government Emerging Leaders Program on strategic branding and leadership, and contributed to many customized personal leadership and branding programs for leaders from African nations and ASEAN countries in collaboration with Razak School of Government. In addition to training-related collaboration, he has also spoken at Razak School of Government in its leadership forum, Razak Roundtable, and authored the RSOG Saïd Business School Nation Branding White Paper, published in August 2020. We have 3 questions for Dr. Paul Temporal. Firstly, what is branding? Secondly, how does branding relate to leadership? And finally, what is the plausible impact of pandemic to branding? Paul, good morning. Let us get started.
Well, Encik Joe, And thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'll just share my screen. And hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be with you today, and I'd like to thank Razat School of Government very much indeed for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. As Nchik Joe said, the occasion is especially important for me and for Side Business School at the university here in Oxford, as it marks the 10th year of our collaborative partnership with RSOG. So it's really nice to be here on this special occasion. The topic we're focusing on today is what's your brand? It's all about branding, as you can guess, a much understood word actually. Branding is quite a complex area, much more complex than people think. It's an exciting topic. It can bring huge benefits and prosperity to nations, organizations, and individuals if we get things right. So in my remarks today, I'll be referencing those three levels, nations, organizations, and leaders in connection with branding, and touch upon the impact that the pandemic may have on these levels. And we've got to squeeze all this into a short time, so I suggest we dive straight in. I'm wondering why this is not sharing. My screen is jammed here.
Mm-hmm.
We'll try this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first question is, of course, what is a brand? And let me start by telling you what a brand is not. Sometimes people get confused when they hear the word brand and they think they know what it is, but often they're not sure. So a brand is not just a name. It's not just names like Tesco or Prada. These do differentiate you from other organizations, of course, but just being a name is nothing really without an identity, without values, without things that we know about those particular organizations. So a name, you've got to have a name, but you need something more than that. Nor is it just a logo. You can see here some famous logos of Louis Vuitton, Nike, and Apple. Now, logos are important for one reason. When you see them, they bring into your mind lots of emotional associations, sometimes rational associations, but a lot of emotional ones. So they're very useful as a tool in reminding people about their experiences with the brand or their aspirations to be with that brand. But it's not a brand in its own right, although logos can be worth a lot of money. You try and buy the Nike logo, you'd be spending billions. And nor is it a slogan. We've got some here, impossible is nothing, which is Adidas, because you're worth it, which is L'Oreal, and incredible India, which is a tourism and investment brand. But these tend to be more like campaign slogans. They may last for 2 or 3 years or more, but really they're just there as a key message, and they don't constitute a brand in its own right. And nor is it advertising, promotion, and PR. A lot of people do believe that A&P, advertising and promotion, is really what branding is all about. But again, that is tactical. So these things are tactical instruments, and without a brand strategy, they are not really used to the full. So they can be off message, they can be meaningless or irrelevant to people. So we've got to have a strategy to go with these tactics. So a brand is really a mixture of several elements. Some are tangible benefits. You can see things, you can feel them, you can touch them, and you can hear them, you can smell them. So tangible benefits are there, but also they have intangible benefits. These are what people think about your brand, what people feel about you. And it's these intangibles that really are most effective in building a brand and brand value. It is about differentiation, but it's all about the emotional relationship that you can build between yourself and the consumer, your brand and the consumer. And the power of emotion is very relevant to all areas of brand. It is a promise to be delivered. So when you get brand messages, they're usually communicated to deliver a promise, but you of course have to deliver on that promise. It's about, therefore, an experience in the minds of consumers. So we're only as good, really, as our last consumer experiences. But my best attempt and the most simplest way of defining what a brand is that it's a relationship. So when we build a brand, we are building a relationship with all those people, all those different target audiences that we want to attract to us and to stay with us. So how do we build relationships? Maybe we can look at consumer psychology, human psychology, to get an indication of this. So here's a little, what I call the emotional ladder of brand success. So imagine yourself as an individual, not too difficult. You can go to a conference, you can go to an event, you may become aware of someone you hadn't seen before. And in the break, you may go across and exchange some information. Tell them about you, ask them about them. And if you both like what each other's saying, this may lead to some respect. And if you respect a person, then this can lead to you meeting again and quite frequently, and then you tend to become friends. Now, when you reach the friendship stage with someone, in swings some really, really important items, one of which is trust. So if you have a close friend, you would trust them with your valuables, you trust them with your children, you allow them to do things that you wouldn't particularly trust other people with. And with trust comes loyalty. So if someone tries to harm your best friend, you will protect them. If your best friend says something one day to upset you, you will forgive them. And it's a very short step then to togetherness and partnership. Maybe a long-time business relationship, could be marriage, could be a long-term friendship. But that's the kind of progress we get in building a relationship. And this is what the big brands do. They climb this ladder. They reach these higher levels of trust and loyalty and togetherness. If you look at consumer brands like Apple and Nike, which I've mentioned, they have this loyal following. People trust them, even though their products are made all over the world. They trust the value of those products. Unfortunately, from my research and what my colleagues have done, Asian brands tend to be down towards the lower end of this ladder. So we can get some, with lots of information being pumped out about brands, you can see it in the newspapers, and we get some respect. So Asian brands do get some respect, but they're not too good at getting into the areas of trust, loyalty, and togetherness. So that's something that we should focus on in building our brands. There are basically three main steps that we have to go through in trying to establish this emotional connection and the relationship. One is developing a brand vision, and this is what the brand stands for emotionally in the minds of target audiences. What do you want to stand for? How are you going to connect with them? What's the emotional driver? So it's different from a corporate vision. A corporate vision is all about the long term in terms of the business and numbers and things like that. But the brand vision is all about what we want to stand for emotionally with consumers. And this is underpinned by two basic things. Brand personality, which is really the brand values stated as personality traits. And most brands that are successful develop this charismatic personality. They use personality traits instead of values, because if you use a person and the traits they have to represent your brand, not a real person, but a set of traits, then this is going to be much more easily accepted by consumers, and you'll be able to connect with them more easily. And the third main step is brand positioning. And this is a statement of why you're different and why you're better. So there's a bit of business related stuff in there. It's really about why should people come to you? Why should people like your brand? So these things, some companies spend a lot of time on to get them right. And it's all about creating this strong brand identity. And I'd just like to quickly say that brand identity is how you want to be seen, whereas brand image, which is often talked about, is how you are actually seen. So if there is a difference between how you want to be seen, your identity, and how you're actually seen, your image, that's what we call a perception gap. And we have to close those perception gaps. It's not good to have a brand image different to what we want. And of course, it's easily found out by market research, is that perception basis. Once you have that strategy in place, it's then down to implementation. And we've got three main areas for this. One is brand communication, and that of course relies on consistency. We have to be very, very consistent with how and what we're communicating. Brand engagement, which is internal branding and getting employees to buy in to what we're trying to say, what we're trying to do, getting them to feel something emotionally as well about the brand. And finally, brand management, which is all about guarding the brand, making brand action plans, delivering the strategy, monitoring the success of the brand initiatives, and adding some structure to make sure things work properly. So very quickly, that's an overview of the branding process. There are many, many benefits, some of them financial and some of them others. I'll just quickly go through these. Here's a graph of Apple, for example. Now, Apple earlier this year reached a market capitalization of over $2 trillion. That's more than the GDP of some countries. And if you think about Apple, it doesn't produce many products. There's only about 5 or 6 products in its range. It doesn't make any of them at all. It outsources all its production. And it doesn't have many net tangible assets. So what does this represent, this huge share value? Well, it represents the intangible asset value of Apple, and that is mainly the brand. So fantastic results you can get through brand building. There's a lot of benefits for branding of countries, and I've got some down here. These will be interesting for you to look at later after the webinar. I've put a lot of content into these slides. I'll just pick out 2 or 3 things here. With a strong national brand, you can attract a global capital. You can get those increases in inbound tourism and FDI, foreign direct investment. You'll find it easier to develop stronger international partnerships. And one of the key ones, of course, is enhancement of nation building, developing that confidence, that pride, that harmony, that ambition, that national resolve throughout your country with all its citizens. And you can get greater access to global markets. All this plus more is part of the benefits of branding at a more large-scale level. I'd just like to mention the public service here, because there's a strong case for branding the public service. I think the public service is really at the front line. Whenever Malaysia deals with customers, whether they're internal or external relationships, The nexus of that is the public service. They get involved with investors, with businesses, with visitors, with citizens, and often people judge a country by the efficiency and effectiveness of its public service. So the public service, if delivering strong vision and values, can be a very great brand vector for creating national identity and image. So it's really important. And sometimes nations find it difficult to produce an overall national brand. It's quite a complicated area to look at, but they feel more comfortable in looking at the public service and what can be done. Now, often ministries and departments do this on their own, and it wouldn't be too difficult to actually put this across the whole of the public service. So policies, diplomacy, customer experience, they influence a country's image more than advertising and promotion. And the customer experience is part of what the public service delivers. Let me just go on to question 2. And how does branding relate to leaders? Well, branding, as you've probably realized by now, is strategic and it drives businesses and marketing. It's on boardroom agendas. Some of the more successful organizations in the world's top businesses and top brands, they have this very firmly on their boardroom agenda. Some have boards of directors just to look at brand performance. So Philips, for example, has a brand equity board to look at how things impact on the brand in the business way of doing things. Secondly, leaders are responsible for strategy and performance. And this includes brand as well. So it's not just responsible for delivering on business strategy, it's also delivering on brand strategy. And some of the top CEOs in the world now have come up through the branding route from chief brand officers and from the senior C-suite area. Thirdly, leaders create, develop and manage brands. So it's in their role, really, in their perspective, to be able to brand things and deliver brand strategies, because really brand is top-down driven. It has to be strategically driven from the top. However, it has to encompass the whole of the workforce. So although it's top-down driven, buy-in is necessary and leaders are responsible for getting that buy-in. That's one thing saying we're going to do things in advertising and promotion. It's another thing to deliver them, and employees actually deliver the brand experience. There's also the guardianship role that leaders have, and they're responsible for making sure that everything is on brand. Leaders can also be brand ambassadors. So when they represent an organization, it could be a ministry, a department, or a company, they are putting themselves out externally as well as internally to certain stakeholders, and they lead by example. So if you're a leader, whenever you appear in the media, in public, or whatever, you are an ambassador for your brand. And sometimes leaders can have a profound impact on the strength and feeling that people have towards brands. On a national scale, for example, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, has become what many people view as a fantastic brand ambassador for New Zealand. So it's true that leaders are brand ambassadors, and also the leader can be a brand. So you can brand leaders, you can do the same kind of things. So sometimes leaders have to think about themselves. What is your vision? What have you got to say about what you stand for? What are your values? How can you get these to be accepted, and how can you share them with other people in your organization? What's your brand identity? How do you as a leader want to be seen? And what's your image? How do you know how you're actually seen? Maybe you don't. So these are things which leaders don't automatically sit down every morning and think, well, I must think about my brand identity. But occasionally you just have to step back and think and say, well, hang on, what do I stand for? How am I portraying my organization? What is my brand? How can I improve it and improve my company or organization? So I've mentioned also that leaders are responsible for developing the brand internally. So this brand-based culture is very important for leaders to develop. And of course, good leadership inspires others to do and achieve great things. So the leader as a motivator, as a brand catalyst, if you like, is also an important part of leaders' activities. We should be pleased to see that we can inspire others as leaders and get them to achieve things they didn't think they could achieve. This is all part of the brand building process. So leaders have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders with regard to brand building at an organization level and at a personal level. And these have to be brought together. Let me turn now to question 3, which is the plausible impact of the pandemic on branding. And I'll separate this slightly into 3 levels. The first of which is nation brands, so country brands. Let's have a look at what's happened. Well, we all know now that the virus, the COVID-19 virus, and its mutations and variants are not going to go away. This virus is mutating at an enormous rate, and we're going to have to manage it. So just like influenza, which mutates every year, and we have vaccination programs for flu, so we're going to have to do with this virus. And they're already talking now, and certainly in the UK, about the next way of managing vaccination programs to give boosters throughout the winter and next year and so on. So it's a fact of life, and we've got to put up with it, manage it. It's interesting that some global indices, some indexes of global performance for nations are rating them on pandemic management now. So there's putting extra questions in when they look at the perceptions of different countries. They're putting questions in on how well has the pandemic been managed. And in the Global Soft Power Index, for example, which was published in 2021, February, it was the pandemic question was asked about various countries. The UK did very badly because that previous year, 2020, the UK government did not do a good job of managing the pandemic, and people were very upset. So it got quite a low rating on pandemic management. It probably, if that was done again now, get a much higher rating. So these kind of things are a moving, not a moving feast really, but they're shifting all the time. They are snapshots of where people think you're good or you're not so good. And the pandemic's had a lot of policy implications for governments in brand management. So there's this big dilemma of health versus wealth and very difficult choices that governments have had to make. So how well do we protect health, have lockdowns, keep people off work, make people work from home? How can we do that and yet maintain the wealth of the economy when we're closing down most of the economy or a lot of it? So, you know, it's this balance, making very, very difficult choices for governments. And the pandemic's deeply impacted employment, businesses and jobs. A lot of people have become unemployed. A lot of businesses have gone out of action and jobs are disappearing. This has accelerated the economic downturn and given rise to massive debt. I know the UK debt now is in hundreds of billions of pounds, hundreds of billions, around about 600–700 billion, I think, at the moment, and rising. We're also getting what we call the new poor, or what the World Bank calls the new poor, where more and more people, because of the unemployment rising, the businesses closing, jobs disappearing, more and more people who wouldn't be classed as poor are now being dragged into this net. And because of the poor spending capabilities they have now through unfortunate circumstances, they're not being able to make the spending decisions they could before on things like holidays, education, and other things. There's also a need for effective, accessible, and affordable healthcare. That's pretty obvious. And education has come in for a bit of a hammering. Some say there's years of challenges forecast for education. It's almost a lost generation. Kids not being able to go to school, missing exams, not having careers, can't get to university, and no retraining capability there for them to be able to get jobs. On the positive side, technology and science has delivered not just challenges, but opportunities and new jobs and new skills and structural shifts of employment. So technology and science are really being given, are giving a great boost to the future. But again, have we got the people to fill those new jobs with those skills needed? Probably not at the moment. And climate change is just seen as a threat multiplier. It makes everything worse with food insecurity and various impacts of climate change that we're seeing. If we look at the corporate side and the effects of the pandemic, we can see that there's been a strong shift in consumer thinking, behavior, and buying patterns in all sectors, and it's unlikely to return to the past. So the old normal is not going to be the same as the new normal. There's been a democratization of commerce and a shift from traditional retail purchasing and shopping to online commerce and shopping. In the UK, it's called a decline of the high streets. So lots and lots of high street brands going up for sale, and high street businesses just closing, rows and rows and rows of them just closing. So even some big brands have not survived. So if we look at a well-known British brand you may have come across in Malaysia, and those of you who have been to UK will certainly know about it, Debenhams. Debenhams was slow to adapt to going online, and it had to go into administration. It just could not cope. But the administrators could not sell it as it was. So the company that bought it was an online retailer called Boohoo, and it bought Debenhams for 55 million. But it said that represents the brand and what website there is. We do not want the 118 stores, and we do not want the 12,000 people who work in it. So 12,000 jobs lost, stores, 118 stores closed, and the brand went very cheap at 55 million. But the brand was the only valuable thing left in that particular circumstance. We are, by contrast, seeing the rise of technology brands, new jobs, skills shortages, etc., have given rise to the likes of Amazon and others. And on the negative side, we've seen a disaster really for SMEs and supply chains. They've been affected by a slowdown in corporate business. They haven't been able to survive themselves. They've had little government support, particularly in the UK. So SMEs have really been damaged. And big corporates have not stood up and said, we will help you out. And neither has the government. So that's going to take some years to put right. And there's finally this pressure on all brands to include sustainability and net zero in their planning. So consumer power and activism is now forcing brands to do what they should have been doing for some time. And lastly, the impact of pandemic on leaders. Well, here we're talking about leading in uncertain times. So there's a lot of external and internal turbulence. It provides multiple demands and pressures on leaders who have limited resources to deal with these. So one of the effects on leaders is the need to have tolerance of ambiguity. How can we survive when nothing is certain? How can we do things and take action when things are uncertain? And have we got the right mental agility? So things change very fast. We don't know what's coming next. So we need to be flexible. Leaders need to be flexible, more adaptable. They have to be nimble and fast and more creative to dealing with challenges. This requires emotional resilience. And how do we manage pressure? You know, how do we cope with all this anxiety, tension, fatigue, and so on? And how do we help others who have mental health challenges in our organizations? Emotional resilience is really tested to the fore. One of the ways of looking at this is from one of the top sports people in the world world #1 tennis player, who said, yeah, we get fantastic pressures on us as top athletes, but we embrace pressure as a privilege. Pressure is a privilege. It tests our game and it tests our character. Can we come out the other side fighting and winning? So this is a very positive thinking view that some leaders can have and do have, and that we can learn from the top athletes. And of course, we have to have situational and strategy reviews. So occasionally leaders just have to stand back, and they need this helicopter mind. Sometimes you're in such a thick of activity, things happening here, there, and everywhere on a daily basis. You need some time just to step back, to rise above it all, and take this helicopter view and say, look, this is okay. I can see what's happening here. Now, maybe we should do things slightly differently. Another analogy is by looking at this as the dance floor and a balcony. So on the dance floor, you're in the thick of action. Everyone's dancing around you. You're dancing with your partner and so on. And you're unaware of what's happening apart from what's in the moment. But maybe having a break and going up and sitting on the balcony and looking down on the dancing, maybe you can get a different perspective and so on. So leaders are going to be tested to the full, but great leaders are going to be able to deal with these things. So what should they do more of? This is my last slide, I think. Celebrate the values we've rediscovered, this caring side of the human spirit. Treat employees as valued customers. Trust, loyalty, and partnership is required. Build this culture of kindness, compassion, togetherness, and shared values. We didn't have this so much before the pandemic. Now we've all been together, and whether you're rich or poor, from wherever you may be, we realize that all people are the same. We get hit by the same kind of things. So let's be kind to each other. Communicate often, openly, transparently, and consistently. Don't give out mixed messages. Give people opportunities so that they can feel heroic. They can feel to get a chance to be heroes of creativity and progress. Involve everyone in the change. There will be no movement unless everyone moves. And finally, wherever you can, recognize and reward staff for the hard work they've put in over the pandemic. Little things, even little words, mean a lot. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to take some questions there.
Thank you very much, Paul, for enlightening or insightful presentation on branding, and the practical example that you offer help us to relate brand leadership and to imagine the impact of the pandemic to the brand. We have started to receive quite a number of questions, Paul. I read to you the first one that we pick up from our Facebook page. This is from Mr. Hairil Halil. He asks you, what is a general way to close the brand identity and brand image gap? How do you reverse negative brand image?
Well, usually, if there's a perception gap between the brand identity and brand image, it could be that this is an actual gap, that you haven't been delivering on the experience for the customer that you promised them. So it actually may be a real gap like that, in which case you have to really look hard at how you're going to develop and make that experience better for the customer. But sometimes brand image, the perceptions, have root in fiction. So people, they're not actually real, but people think they're real. So when customers perceive you in a certain way, It may be true, it may not be true, but to them it is true because it's in their mind. So at the very least, you have to find out precisely what these areas are. Why is it different? Why is the image different to the identity? Once you've found out those key areas, are these mistaken? Is it just a matter of communication that that's gone wrong? Or have we actually not been delivering on what we've been promising? So really, if we focus hard on the consumer experience, the customer experience, that's the best way. And we should be doing that anyway, all the time. So all the time, try and enhance that experience that you're giving the customer, and know precisely what you've got to do. Thank you.
Paul, I'll go straight to the second questions from Putri. Putri said, ASEAN countries are said to be positioned on the lower part of emotional ladder of a brand success. Why is it so, and how do we go up the ladder, Paul?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Is that I don't know what the reason is, but certainly in my experience, companies and organizations in Asia have really focused on the tactical elements of advertising, promotion, and a lot of PR, without really thinking about what is behind this, what should really drive those areas. So they've approached it very much in terms of an inside out. Let's go and project ourselves in the best way we can, but without thinking what that should be. So one of the things I would say to the Asian companies and organizations is really think hard about how you can develop that emotional side that will attract people, not just the rational side. I think there's also been a focus, and this is quite understandable, on product quality, on quality of services and products, which of course, for example, China has been going through. So made in China has not been great. So now they're trying to move that. And there's, in the Chinese government, there's now a mention of brand at various levels in order to try and rectify the made in China perception. So we must have the basics there for a brand anyway, which is highest possible quality, at least as good as that of your competitors. Once you've done that, everything is equal. So in the rational world, everything is equal. So I can produce the same product as you. I can do the same service as you, but how can we make it emotional? So this is the key to what many of the companies and organizations haven't been doing. It's not that difficult once you go through the visioning and values process, but you've got to have power to implement that brand strategy and not be swayed by some agencies who just want to communicate.
Paul, we have this question from Nazri, which is very interesting. He asks you, how can we leverage brand analytics in promoting agile, sustainable, and resilient governance?
What was that, brand analytics?
Yeah, how can we leverage on brand analytics in promoting agile, sustainable, and resilient governance?
Yeah, there's one thing, I was talking about leaders here, and it's one thing to do analytics at a kind of organizational level, and it's easier to do that from market research. So with market research and using brand analytics and metrics, you can easily find out, where the weaknesses and strengths of your brand are, and that would discover things like the emotional side where it may be lacking or it may not. But with leaders as individuals, they usually haven't got this brand analytics available for them, although there are psychometrics tests which you can use to discover your strengths and weaknesses as a leader and as a brand. So on some of the programs that we've run with Razat School of Government, for example, we've used psychometrics prior to the program to bring people together to look at their leadership style, to look at their leadership, a brand vision, and the brand values. So you can use analytics in that sense, but it's better to have some information than not at all. Of course, you can ask people in your organization, but they might not tell you the truth. So you need to get some basic self-knowledge, I think. That's an most important thing.
It's an interesting point about self-knowledge. I'll go to another question from the Facebook from Chio Lingo. She asks you, given the changing landscape, should brands change their fundamentals to adapt and adopt new strategies?
That's it's a very good question, that actually. You may remember that there are 3 steps in the branding process: it's developing the brand vision, developing the personality or the values, and also the positioning. Now, with respect to the brand vision and the brand values or personality, those tend not to change. Those tend to be fixed. They're long-term things. So a brand vision is there, it's broad enough to encompass changes, but it's powerful enough to drive everything forward over the next foreseeable future, next many years. And the personality, the brand personality also tends to stay the same. And if you compare this to humans, our human personality, each of us has a own personality. We're very unique because we're all different personalities. And that tends not to change. Once we get past the ages of 8, 9, or 10, then most of our personality is fixed. And it tends not to change as we go through life, maybe slightly, but not a lot. However, what does change in the brand process is positioning. Positioning has to change and take knowledge of what is happening in the marketplace and what other players are doing. So with positioning, it brings in the competitive element, and positioning allows us to react to other people's activity, brand activity, whatever, because positioning can change. Our position compared to others can change. So that's one way in which we find that most of the big companies that I've worked with adopt that process. So fixed on your vision and values, but flexible on your positioning. And often market research will give you the changing perceptions snapshots that you particularly want, which allow you to perhaps change your positioning. And I would recommend that brands check out their positioning strategies every 12 months so that they can see what other organizations are like and whether they're changing in their competitor activity or not. Thank you.
Next question from Sharizman, also from the Facebook. He asked you 3 questions, all related to internal branding. He wants to know the importance of internal branding, what are the initiatives can be done on internal branding, and if you have a particular experience managing internal branding.
Yes, that's interesting as well. And yes, internal branding is extremely important. It's all very well for leaders and people at the top of organizations to develop a brand strategy. And that, of course, has to be done at most senior levels, otherwise it won't happen. But that doesn't mean to say that everyone is going to deliver on that. So we have to look at the vision and the values and say, well, how can we put those into practice within our organization? And some companies go to extreme lengths to ensure that people in their organization are dealing with this issue. I've worked with many organizations where on occasions we've set up a training function to train people in every department, in every job, at various levels throughout the organization, throughout the pyramid, in the values and what it means for them. Because we want them to deliver on these values. So we've got to get them, first of all, to understand what the brand is all about. Secondly, we've got to get them emotionally engaged. We've got to get our employees to buy into this, to think, you know, I'm really feeling something for this. I'm really excited about what's happening. And then we've got to get them to do something about it. So everyone wants to know when a brand is launched in a company or a new brand strategy, they want to know, well, what's in it for my job? So, you know, they want to know how it affects them. And if they can do their job better, it's going to get them more respect, more rewards, and so on. So it's a must-have, really. And I've worked with the companies who've done that, they've set up training of trainers programs. They've trained people right throughout the organization. We did this, for example, in a large telecoms business in Asia, where everyone was ended up being trained in the brand and what it meant for their jobs. Other big players like Intel and people like this, they pick out role models. They get role models from all over their organization of who's good on innovation, who's good on responsiveness, who's good on caring or whatever. So they bring out these role models. They get people acknowledged. They give them a lot of face time in terms of programs, and they make videos around them. They ask them to develop training programs so that they can show people how they've done this particular brand value really well. So, you know, it's not easy and it's not straightforward and it takes time, but if you don't have that internal branding, then you're not successful.
Thank you, Paul. This question from Joanna Lentasamana. She asks you, what is the best way to elevate brand for public agency when it comes to social media without coming across not taken seriously?
Yes, I think there's possibly some kind of hidden question within that question. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is we can, like the pandemic, we cannot escape social media. And people will talk about us whether we talk about it or not. So we've got to monitor social media and we've got to be a participant in it. But again, you know, if we have a brand strategy, if we have the vision, the emotional connection, and these values which we hold strong, we can talk to people through the social media and reflect those values. So if we're saying we're a particularly friendly brand, we can be friendly in the way in which we communicate through social media. We don't have to be condoning to people. We don't have to talk from an elevated position. We need to just accept that people want to communicate with us and all the time stress what values we hold. So, you know, we've got to be careful because some people will obviously not react in the way we want. But again, you know, it's part of perception management. How do people see us on social media? So, you know, again, there are analytics in this area where we can see what people think about us on social media. We can define where we're liked and where we're not liked. And so this will give us valuable information as to how we're communicating. But yeah, social media is a must-have, and we need to do it much more carefully than we should do, than we have done rather, and particularly in the public sector. Private sector tend to be very well organized on this. Public sector, maybe not so. So maybe we ought to give more attention to that in the public sector organizations.
Paul, Dr. Sharifah from the Ministry of Education is asking you, what do you mean by pressure as privilege?
Right. Well, we all feel pressure, and the way that some people look upon it is, oh dear, you know, this is affecting my health. I'm feeling really stressed, very, very anxious. Therefore, I'm not performing well, and it affects performance. It's a matter of motivational thought, really. How do you think about things? Are you a half empty glass person or a half full glass person? And what we've learned from sport and the top performers in all sports is that they have tremendous pressures. They have massive media exposure. They have billions of people watching them all over the planet. They have good times and they have bad times. But what they really believe is that pressure, because they've been allowed to get to that senior position, that top position, they have been really given a privileged place. And therefore it would be wrong not to accept that with all that it comes with. So pressure is regarded by them as a privilege, as something to be recognized and saying, well, you know, I'm getting this because I've been good. So it needs to be some, again, some self-knowledge, some self-talk in terms of, you know, how can I be even better? Can I use these experiences that I've had to improve and to get better and better? So it's all about positive thinking, but embracing pressure rather than trying to hide it. Yeah.
Paul, I go to this question from one Manso. From your perspective, what are the top 3 brandings that Malaysia is currently presenting globally?
The top 3 what, sorry?
The top 3 brandings that Malaysia is currently presenting globally.
Oh, does that mean organization brands or?
I suppose it relates to the organization in Malaysia.
Yeah, I think there's no one that's really, I mean, Malaysia hasn't got a global brand yet in terms of organizations or companies. The nearest it's probably got is Petronas. And they've been doing quite a good job of building their brand over recent years. And you know, they can do more, I think. They've become quite well known through Formula One and their tie-up with Mercedes. But again, you know, I sometimes wonder why they don't say Petronas. Where is it from? You know, we don't know whether it's Petrobras or Petronas or where's it from. So sometimes there's a reluctance of people to say where they've come from. And, you know, made in Malaysia is regarded as quite good, and quality of Malaysian products and services actually is highly rated. So Malaysia as a whole has quite a good national brand image, could do better, but it really has no serious weaknesses. But in terms of global brands, again, I see them focusing on the rational, on the business side all the time, and not on the brand side. So sad to say, there's much more needs doing in terms of branding for both private and public sector in Malaysia.
Paul, I wish we could read all the questions. Last question, Paul.
Yeah.
Apart from education, one of the bigger brands that your country produces is football. Can England beat Germany tonight, Paul?
Goodness me, everyone's in a talk about pressure being a privilege. We've got England playing tonight. The whole country has kind of stopped work almost and looking forward to the evening match. Well, anything's possible, isn't it, Joe? Anything's possible. And we'll be hoping that mistakes of the past are not repeated tonight. So yes, Germany haven't played that too well recently. So we're fairly hopeful, let's put it that way. Of course, as an Englishman, I would bound to say, yes, of course we can do it. Yeah. I'm not going to give a score though.
Paul, we have come to the end of our session this afternoon. Would you like to offer some parting words to our participants?
Well, I would, and thank you so much for listening and involving me in this webinar today. I'd like to thank you and Joe for all the support you've given me and the Razak School of Government and all the participants of the webinar. By just listening and the quality of your questions, I can see that you're very, very keen to explore the world of brand, the world of branding from various aspects, from leadership aspect, from organizational aspects. And I really wish you the best of luck in developing your personal brands and in developing the brands of the organizations which you represent. I wish too that I could go on and answer more questions, but I think we've covered a fair bit of ground today, and I hope maybe at some other time we'll be able to entertain some more questions. So thank you all very much, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Dr. Paul Temporal, thank you very much for spending time with us this afternoon. On behalf of the school, we would like to wish you good health, Dr. Paul, and good luck to England tonight. We also would like to thank participants for taking part. We value your views and feedback. We apologize for not being able to read all the questions. We also apologize for any shortcomings throughout this program. Please follow us on social media for future sessions. Till we meet again, please take care and stay safe. Thank you very much. Thank you once again, Paul.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.